One of the major problems is that the word religion tends to be understood as some sort of universal concept and has always been there, and which is obvious that it's there, and as such, as a kind of neutral concept. And as if we can simply look at the world and see those religions and then start making a list of what belongs to them and what doesn't belong to them. And that kind of feels intuitively normal and right to most people, while it isn't. And it isn't because of a couple of reasons. First of all, you can't just make a list of things that then kind of is the perfect example of what that religion would be or should be, because there's too many varieties of religions, of a particular religion in any case, but we'll get to that later, I guess. But the other aspect is it's not neutral in the sense that religion always has had this political element to it. The way we construe the world in religions has always had a particular historic background, which means that the political power plays at play at those times always feed into the way we look at religion. And not to get too historically difficult immediately, let's stick to the example of Islam, and the way people started perceiving Islam is exactly what you said, that people had this feeling that they knew what Islam was, even though they have never been there. Even more so, sometimes if you want to go to a certain country, you can't even bring the knowledge of that country to another country. Let me give you a very concrete example. I went to Iran for a holiday one day, just as a tourist, and checking out things, and of course learning more about that particular form of Islam. And then a couple of months later, I wanted to go to the US, actually to interview Hossein Nasr, who has also Iranian roots and is a very important scholar in the US of Islam. But all of a sudden, I figured out I couldn't get a visa to the US because I had been to Iran. And that's a perfect example of you can't even bring the knowledge that you took there and bring it to another place sometimes, because they politically create boundaries that make it difficult to start to get to know the other side. But that's really concretely politically. But the boundary is often very mental. And specifically when it comes to Islam, the boundary is also that people simply think that they know what religion is. And religion, by definition, is institutionalized and dogmatic and problematic and creates all these kinds of violence. Just look at those terrorists, for example. And then what they do is collapse the whole of Islam into a couple of terrorists, which obviously are there and they do exist and it's a group. But nobody takes the time to even check, are they marginal? Are they the dominant force? What is Islam really about? Is this a particular thing in this point of time, or has it historically always been there, or whatever? What is the complexity of a religion? People don't even have the feeling they have to research it, because the concept of religion makes it so obvious that it is dogmatic, that it will lead to violence if you leave the dogmatic ideas go rampant in society and so on. So that's a bit what I mean. The way we look at religion in general, but certainly at specific religious groups such as Muslims, is always informed by particular historical moments and the politics that go together with them.
Yeah, thanks for unpacking that. And like, I'm really struck by the whole thing of you going to Iran and not being able to come to the United States, and there being these deep like psychological barriers and prejudices that we have, and stories and ideas and narratives. And it's like very it's very black. It becomes like very black or white, right? Mm-hmm. It becomes like these very black or white conceptual things. And then also, we like to focus on the really negative things, right? So if there is a terrorist or that somebody commits that kind of act, then it's like everybody's like that. And you see that in the United States, because you're where are you located right now? You're in Europe,
I'm in
right?
Belgium, yeah.
You're in Belgium, yeah. So polarization is all over the place, but United States, the political parties and the culture here, the culture wars, there's a lot of polarization, especially here. And this is what people do. It's like they'll say, well, look at those liberals or look at those conservatives. And they'll find people that are very extreme, have very extreme viewpoints, and they'll group everybody into that slot. And that it just seems like that's how the mind it's drawn to, like these very extreme examples and outliers and cases. And it's just easy to then make everything black or white very neatly and just give us certainty, and avoiding this kind of gray, nuanced area that kind of exists in all of experience and all of reality.
Yeah. And that's, of course, because we can't live without categories either. We always have to make categories to kind of get a hold of life itself and to know what we have to do. Oh, I meet somebody like this. Probably I'll have to reply like this, or I have to talk like this. Half of the time, those categories really are useful. But sometimes when those categories get really rusted and too general and too generalized, then they become really problematic. Yeah? And that's half of the problem of religion itself. It is a category which often has outgrown its use, if it ever had a use. And people, again, coming back to the neutrality point, that people think it's a neutral term, and it isn't. The way it is used always is embedded within a specific power play. And so, yeah, it's a bit the same like the political polarization right now in the US. Yeah, indeed. Which often also has this undertone in the US more than here in Belgium. We've got the same tendency between the left and the right, of course, but less in terms of religion like you have in the United States, how the evangelical side is linked to the Republican side. And how people often in the US, when they use the term spiritual but not religion or not religious, are also partly specifically making clear that they're not like evangelical Christians that are on the Republican side. And that, of course, for me as a Belgian Christian is a bit weird, because I'm a pretty progressive leftist guy myself when it comes to politics, but I have no relationship at all with evangelical Christians in most of what they think, but I am a Christian nonetheless. And that in itself goes to show the diversity of religion. We're a couple of 1,000 kilometers apart, and the way I live my Christianity has very little to do with what evangelical Christians do or think most of the days, or mostly. But that doesn't mean they're not Christian. I might have my differences, and I think they're not following the real teachings of Christ, and I'll make my theological point about it, why I think so. But I'm not able to say, certainly not in a sociological sense, that they wouldn't be Christian. And the exact same thing, of course, is the same for Muslims. And you've got that probably exists in the US as well. In Belgium, we had a couple of times when there's some terrorist attack somewhere in the world that people start asking of Muslims that they have to go and say sorry for it, kind of. They have to make this public confession that they are not like them. And that, for me, has always struck me as so bizarre, why people would think that somebody who has nothing to do with some terrorist who does something simply because there's a link of Islam there, that's exactly the same as me in Belgium having to say sorry for somebody who bombed an abortion clinic in the US or something. But when it comes to Christians in Belgium, people won't make that categorical mistake. But when it comes to Muslim, they do it all the time. Oh, you're part of them, and them means you're all like that unless you constantly say you're not. Makes it a bizarre kind of polarization indeed.